This is the joint meeting between the City of Sioux Falls Council and the Minnehaha County Commissioners on July 24th, 2018. Recognize a quorum on the County Commission side and ask for roll call.
Councilmembers Brecky?
Yes.
Erickson?
Here.
Kylie? Neitzer? Selberg?
Yes.
Sol?
Yes.
Starr?
Yes.
Staley?
Yes.
Quorum is present. I'd ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd ask for approval of the agenda from the Minnehaha County.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.
Motion on the city side?
Move approval. Second.
Roll call.
Councilmembers Brecky?
Yes.
Erickson?
Yes.
Selberg?
Yes.
Sale?
Yes.
Starr?
Yes.
Staley?
Yes. Agenda is approved.
Item number 1 is the final proposed change order RFP number 10, number 11, and number 12, and an update on the Irene Hall Museum Resource Center. Bill Hoskins, good afternoon, Bill. I almost
Good
said morning.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bill Hoskins, Director, Siouxland Heritage Museum. I'm happy to report that the Irene Hall Museum Resource Center is nearing completion. It is both ahead of schedule and under budget. We began the project in last August on the 28th, and a little over a week ago, on Monday, July 9th, we had a substantial completion inspection that generated a punch list. The contractor is moving through that punch list very expeditiously, and a final walkthrough is tentatively scheduled for Monday, coming up. In the course of the project, we've had what I would call a few loose ends, and that's really why I'm here today. We have 3 proposals, RFP number 10, number 11, and number 12, that are, in essence, the loose ends. They deal with painting. We've chosen not to paint a couple spaces that there's no reason to paint the cement block around the electrical conduit and in a mechanical space. And addition of a vinyl base to finish off the walls in some of our storage areas, not unlike what you see here. And finally, we are the Siouxland Heritage Museums, and they left off an S, and it's to add the S to the sign anyway. In addition to these costs, there are a couple other costs left in the project. The City Council and County Commission agreed to donate or give $25,000 towards the construction of 54th Street. That project is underway, and they're still anticipating completion of that sometime near the end of next week. One of the other things in that regard is a driveway across the right-of-way from 54th Street to our parking lot. That will cost about $6,000. The budget status as a whole is in really great shape. Since the memo was written, there have been a couple additional bills. At this moment, we've spent $3,382,151.85. There's about $100,000 outstanding, both for the architect and the holdback on the construction contract. And I estimate that we'll be under budget when everything's said and done, between $180,000 and $182,000. I'm here really tonight. I would ask you to approve a change order consisting of RFP number 10, 11, and 12. If you approve those change orders, it will alter this contract $154. add $154.84 to the total. And that's already reflected in the numbers I gave you.
Thank you, Bill.
Questions?
Are there any questions from the audience? Bill? Are there any questions from the council? Commissioner Karski?
Number 12, the S they left off, I'm hoping it's the one on the end of museums.
It is.
Okay.
It is the end.
Additional questions for Bill?
Can I just make it?
Councilman?
Oh, a comment. Bill, common sense. That's all I can say about you. You just exude that. No, I appreciate the reports. I know it's kind of tedious, but I just feel like this has been so transparent, and when you come in, say, under budget, it's just like magic to the taxpayers' ears. So, thank you so much.
Look for a motion on the commission side.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the proposed RFP changes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.
Motion on the city side.
Move approval. Second.
Motion to approve and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmembers Brecky? Yes. Erickson?
Yes.
Silver?
Yes.
Sale?
Yes.
Scar?
Yes.
Bailey?
Yes. Motion passes.
Item number, motion passes unanimously on both sides. Item number 2 on the agenda is the Community Triage Center briefing. Aaron Sertska.
Good afternoon. Erin Surska. I'm with the Minnehaha County Commission. I'm the Commission Program Development Officer, and I've had the opportunity to work with this project for about the last year and a half. I'd like to note before I jump in that we have a lot of the representatives from the policy level committee sitting up there, but also in the audience coming to be able to answer questions and demonstrate support. So with that, talk about how we got here. A few years ago, Carrie Benz, our County Human Services Director, and some other community members came together and had a brainstorming session about how we can work things, do things differently for some of the familiar faces that we have that cross systems. At that time, West Care became our mental health service provider in our jail, and they said, have you ever heard of a triage center? And they're like, no, but maybe we want to learn more. So a few years ago, a few stakeholders went to Las Vegas to look at their triage center and came back and said, this is a very great idea. And they continued meeting to kind of decide what that would maybe look like here. In 2017, Minnehaha County wrote a grant and was awarded $50,000 from the MacArthur Foundation to go through a planning process. The first thing that was done is a collaborative was built and a charter was signed to embark upon a 1.5-year planning process of really what a community triage center would mean for here. We had folks from all levels of government and the community and the business to include both healthcare systems that are represented here, nonprofits such as Southeast Behavioral Health, Carroll Institute, Lutheran Social Services, Vera and Sanford, Minnehaha County, the City of Sioux Falls, Public Health, and we also had even the business community. Lloyd was a member, Chris Torkelson. So it was a really great group. What we did was we wanted to make sure we had training. So we did both experiential and didactic training opportunities for the policy committee members. We did 4 site visits to Miami-Dade. We did Bexar County, which is San Antonio, Texas. We went to Las Vegas, Nevada, and then Salt Lake City, Utah. Each of those are different. They are a triage center, but they're based on the needs of their community. They have different funding models. They have different services within it. And that's why we did 4 different ones. And each person that went did not get off and free. We made them do homework. So the qualitative piece was for everyone to provide information about what they think would work back here from those site visits. We also held a conference, a mental health criminal justice conference. We used some of this funding, but also we got a grant from the state of South Dakota, the state crisis grant, to help fund that. We brought speakers in from across the nation, invited all the community, and we had a very good turnout with about 100 to provide that training. We did a sequential intercept mapping. What that means is we had about a 1.5-day workshop where 40 community members came together and talked about the services we have at each intercept of the criminal justice system, where we have gaps, what resources we have and how we can better utilize those and provide next steps. We also have that report. So here we are today, a year and a half later, after going to all those site visits, doing all those conferences. We're here presenting the information that we have. We had two main reports come out of the work for the last year and a half. One is a conceptual report. In this conceptual report, we have recommendations for what a community triage center would look like here. Some very high-level consensus points. It discusses the benefits of having this sort of model within our community, and it outlines the stages and the phases that we have proposed for our community. For very high-level overview, we're talking about 5 stages or about 5 years. We're done with stage 1, which is what we're presenting now with these 2 reports. The next stage is to really nail down some details for a pilot project, then to see and how we can fund that, implement a pilot, look at data. Did it work? Did it not? Do we need to expand? And then go from there. We also created a baseline report. We want to make sure that we have the data and empower the leaders to know what we're doing and why we're doing it and if it's working. Some of the data that came out was very interesting. For example, there was in 2016, we did a calendar year of data from community, healthcare, criminal justice, just to see where we're at. For our healthcare systems, there was 2,300 encounters that were labeled behavioral health. Of those 6,300, around 70% of them were released back home, and the average length of stay was 3 hours, and that the average cost was $6,000 per encounter. So that's $2,000 per hour on average that those behavioral health encounters were utilizing. With the criminal justice system, there was about 24% of the bookings were substance use disorder or mental health. The data we had at that point, it was self-reported. They were asked. Our county is working with the state and piloting a brief mental health screening, which will provide better data. But this is the data we have so far. So about 24% identify as having a substance use disorder or mental health, and 66% of that only was charged with a misdemeanor crime. And as they account for 24% of the bookings, they represent about 37% of the jail bed days. So that's some of the data that we have demonstrating the need and the opportunity to utilize a triage center here, and the baseline report will provide much more data than that. So in the concept report, like I said, there's a lot of high-level consensus points. Bringing together, there was about 20 policy members and about 20 operations level, so that's about 40 stakeholders to come together and come to consensus on even just a few things was a huge feat, and everyone is very, very excited. What we decided was that the triage is to act as a pivot point for those with a mental health or substance use disorder need to go get stabilized and then access and be referred to further treatment or services as needed. Having that target population of a substance use disorder and mental health both. We don't want to replace anything that's currently operating within our community. We're not here to replace the emergency room or the mobile crisis team or anything else, but it's to work in unison with them and refer to them and build upon what's already in our community and provide better outcomes. And which brings us to the last point of our triage center needs to reflect the needs of our community. I've had the opportunity to visit about 5 different triage centers, and they all look very different, and they're all based on the needs and the resources of that community. So that's very important to remember as leaders of the community, and you go to advise and on this project, that you keep that in mind. One thing that everyone always asks is, well, where is this going to be? I'm like, well, that's a very good question. It depends on who you ask. What the group decided was that it needs to be easily accessible by all and close to public transportation. And that's the consensus. And once we move forward with the project, we'll be able to identify an actual location. Some of the next steps is to determine that location and the funding resources needed to have a pilot come to fruition. We're going to need to make sure that we continue the collaboration that's happened so far in our community to make this work. The county has a detox. The healthcare does ERs. Everyone does a little bit of piece. We need to make sure we come together so we can not just get a pilot funded, but also make it sustainable. We need to make sure that we are able to give our program time to grow. Start where we know we need and then grow beyond that in that phase. That's why the phased approach was recommended. And we need to make sure that we're making our decisions on that based on data and research and best practices from across the nation and our own data. And really the next step is to take this collaborative and really nail down what a pilot project would look like to get up and going. The group, we're pulling down the rest of our grant money from the crisis response grant to be able to do further facilitation, to have the group provide more recommendations on that, and to be able to take those next steps. So with that, this is a lot of information, maybe in a little amount of time, and I'll take any questions.
I think we'll start with, is there any audience participation or questions at this point? And there are not, so then I would look for commissioners or councilmen's questions or comments.
Madam Chair.
Where are we at? Commissioner Barth.
Aaron, so what kind of money do you suspect or do we project that things will cost to start up and then continuing to operate? What kind of cost do we expect?
Yeah, when we looked at what kind of a very basic pilot project cost would be, it would be, right around that and this is premise that it's an estimated based on a lot of assumptions, which could change based on what the leaders and group decides is an actual pilot. But we're estimating, right, 2.5 to 3 million a year operating cost.
Additional questions? Councilman Brecky.
Yeah, I had heard you guys speak at another meeting, and you had talked about the money that basically we're wasting. I'd like to give you the opportunity to speak to that a little bit. As I recall, there was a term like $40 million that almost, if we could reconfigure it, that there was the possibility of regrouping.
Yep, and in one of the reports, so how I got that $6,000 average
Yes.
was the 6,300. There's just over 6,300 ER encounters. The total amount of charges from that was just over $40 million. About 32% of that was uninsured. So what we did is we just took the average of that cost to get that about $6,000 per encounter. That's these folks in behavioral health and mental health crisis are using up at the ERs.
There was that, and just one further question. There was something about, I remember frequent flyers too, the cost, how much that is costing. It's the ones that are just coming in cyclical because they're not getting the help they need.
My fault.
There's the answer. Yes, so we want to identify super utilizers, familiar faces. There's lots of different terminology to use those. We don't have the exact number of those yet. We have some with our bookings because we have more data on that of the percentages and some of those breakdowns. But what we want to do when working with the hospitals, actually we're going through BA agreements to be able to combine the data, is identify those who are most using not just our criminal justice resources, but also our healthcare resources. So that's one of our things we're still working on, and hopefully within September we can have those agreements executed and actually have a raw number of our super utilizers and attach a dollar amount to them.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Aaron, I think the one thing that I struggle with is I know that we use that $40 million number. How do we get that money from where it is now and what we're spending it on and put it into a triage center? I mean, that seems in government we spend a lot of money on different things, but if we come up with savings and then reallocating it to the right place, because it's got to be a combination of state and federal, county, and local money that we have. And I could see where the money's there, but we spend it on Medicaid, we spend it on the hospitals, the resources the hospitals put into it, and it's getting you to that 2.5 million or 3 to get rolling. And it just, I'm like most people, I want to see results now. And when I hear more study, it concerns me. So, I mean, we want to do it right, but at the same time, we keep using the term crisis. So I think I asked about 3 or 4 different questions and throwing that all up there in that little bit of a statement, but.
Right, and I think what I deduce is, how we know that it's there, we have enough studies, let's get this going. When you're talking about, one of the major things is funding, and that's why we did the work we have and have everyone around the table. It's not just the 40 million from ERs, but it's also each governmental entity and the community partners that are going to have to come together and decide how this does get operationalized. And so I would turn it back over to you guys as leaders and ask you that question eventually is what we're going to have to do with that as far as that piece goes. And it's going to be, it's going to take some time. So that's on the funding. The second thing is we're talking about implementing, a major program and a change in a lot of different, and it's not just implementing a program, it's also affecting a lot of different policy and procedures of multiple entities, not just government, but nonprofit and private law enforcement. And that sort of change doesn't happen overnight, even within a year. What we've actually, I just did a presentation last week in Nashville at a national conference. SAMHSA invited us to a best practice implementation academy, and we're recognized actually for how we're able to expedite our leadership. So as we are used to South Dakota, we roll our sleeves up and get things done, and this seems like it's taking forever. Nationally, they look at us and applaud our leadership in the opportunity to come together and within a year actually have consensus points and next steps. So as we go through this process, it's important to remember that we're used to getting things done, because that's how we do things here. But we're talking a lot of different systems, a lot of different changes, and actually to get to where we are, we're recognized nationally for that work. So again, as a leadership of our community, I would turn that back over and say, okay, leadership, we have studies, we have things done, now what we do.
Councilman Staley.
Aaron, I'm gonna come back to last week. I was out in my yard, and a neighbor comes over, and he works for a hospital system, and we're talking, and he says, Teresa, we got these frequent flyers coming into our system. He says, why don't we implement an ordinance that says if you have a certain point of alcohol intoxication, you have to, and you get 3 times in 90 days or whatever we decide, that then we would force this person to treatment and or put them in jail. And so I reached out to Commissioner Heiberger, and I talked with our sheriff about this, because I said to this gentleman, I said, well, we're looking at a triage center, and he goes, that's not going to help. And I don't know how much knowledge he has, but I'm bringing this up because I think we have to make a connection between this effort and educating the public about where we're going with this. And so when you talk to people who are in the system and watching this happen, they're going to acknowledge that there's a whole lot of waste going on and that it is costing a lot of money. So when you talked about the $2.5 million operational cost, and that was the pilot program, correct?
That's just the pilot.
So,
Yep.
so then down the road, as we're saying, well, this thing is, we pilotize it, and we say, yes, it's going to work, and then we're going to make it stable, permanent, then what do you think in that cost would be?
That depends on the data and the research, and if what we're doing is successful, and how we want the programs to grow. So as far as that, that's a pie in the sky as far as what, maybe what we have for pilots, what the group wants to stay at, or if it grows, that part depends. Now, we still, no matter what that amount is, you need to build the infrastructure to keep that amount going, whether it's 2.5, 1 million, or however much, right? And one of the things that we learned on the site visits and talking with other jurisdictions is how they've done that. And one way is to have a trust. They use what they call, in Florida, it's called a health trust, and it's something that folks can donate to and invest in, and that's what provides some gaps in the funding that government or Medicaid can't cover to provide some of that. So that's one option of sustaining that funding. But
So,
there's
and then you also just said to us 2 times that you're looking to us as city leaders to take the ball and start running with it. So I don't know what my authority is to start running with any balls. I know we have certain council members and Commissioner Karski's been working on it, but I was thinking, I guess I would say to you, how much money is the hospital investing now, or how much are they losing, the hospital system, in these cases? Because
Yep.
because that, and then I said this to this neighbor, and I said, well, I said hospitals, they come through and they don't get paid. That's it. He goes, no, He says the county has to pick that up. There's a charge to that. So, I mean, nothing's free here, right? And so how much money are we looking to get from the hospitals? And have you had discussions about hiring someone, not that I want to hire anyone new, but hiring some kind of fundraiser to go out? And we just had a meeting with the pavilion, Darren Smith, and he's talking about how they hired a person who's actively
Development
getting
director.
contributions from people. Is that something that you've discussed?
Right, yes. So I think it's a couple things. One is you guys are some of the leadership. There's also some sitting here, and it's going to take everyone to come to the table as leaders to decide that, right? Also, I'll make one more thing, then I'll see if anybody else wants to talk on that, because there's a lot of different questions. As far as, every entity, whether you're the hospital, the city, or the county, a nonprofit, the state, how are we going to get this to work? And that's for them to decide and come to the table. And that conversation, is going to happen.
For them meaning whom?
The hospitals, all leaders, about how we're going to fund this, whether you mentioned the hospital funding and other funding. We're going to have to figure out what is their loss. I don't have that answer. I could tell you aggregate numbers that we have. This is the first. So when we talk about, I don't want more studies, but you ask questions like that, and that's where some more, digging's going to have to happen. And then is there any other questions?
And then was I thinking this right, that at some point we were talking about like maybe a third of this municipal, a third county, and a third privatized? Did I ever hear that? Like the hospitals would put forth as far as, I thought it was going to be a triangular relation, funding-wise.
Yeah, none of those discussions have happened yet. Nothing.
But at the point, but those are the three entities involved. Is that correct?
Well, the policy
The
committee.
city's involved, the county's involved,
Yep.
and
Community,
community.
Health and Keystone and
nonprofits.
a lot of-
So a lot of health,
Or-
but they're
I mean-
all kind of involved with healthcare, right?
And the courts have been there too. Yep.
I think with the briefing, we're in the beginning of we're not in the beginning, we've been working on this for a while, but this is as far as we are to give you the information we have at this point, and we have a ways to go yet. We're at the next step.
But what your questions kind of indicate for our community and for the public is that you guys are asking the right questions, which means we've done the right steps so far. You're like, okay, I get it, I understand it. Now here's the next set of questions we need to answer before we can get the type of, to hire someone to go out and ask for money, they're going to ask the questions that you're asking, and we need to have answers for those. So that's the next step, is to dig in further into the pilot, get those answers identified, and then we can go out, and say, okay, this is exactly what we're funding. Right now we have a conceptual report, we have a concept we can all get behind. It's hard to find really significant funders with a concept versus some of those details and stuff. So that's the next step, is to work through that.
In these other municipalities you visited, were the hospital systems ever the driving force to creating these? Or was it a county?
The four site visits were all different. In Miami-Dade, it was really the courts. Judge Steve Leifman was really the driver there. In Salt Lake City, Utah, was a university healthcare system that really led the charge. In Las Vegas, Nevada, it's WestCare, which is actually a nonprofit, and that was a collaboration between them and the hospital systems and the criminal justice. And then in San Antonio, Texas, it was really a philanthropic opportunity where they had a large philanthropist with lots of money say, I want to invest in a campus. And so then it was a collaboration from there. So each one we saw, it was dependent upon the community. We went to South Carolina. There was a tri-county triage center there, and that was a collaboration mostly between the counties and some of the nonprofit service providers in the area and the city. So it really just depends on the community needs, and the community resources.
Councilman Marshall,
Thank
excuse
you.
me, Salberg.
Well, you just kind of answered my question, which was going to be what were the locations you visited and how comparable were they to Sioux Falls? And it sounds like they were all somewhat bigger communities, I guess, to a fact, but I suppose it doesn't really much matter what the budget and that is. It's kind of how they run, and you can base that off the numbers. And I don't know, I guess the basic point of my question was, where were you, how similar was it to Sioux Falls, and how do you take it and compare it? So You
Right.
answered a big portion already.
Right, and that's, and that's in the concept report, because we understood that every community is different, and that's why each one looks differently. And we said, what do you think as the experts of the community, running the agencies or the government, how does this apply? And those are the questions we asked about funding and policy and that sort of thing. We also went to Arizona, and they are a little bit bigger, but we went for different reasons, so each one is similar in a kind of a different way. But no communities like ours, but it's all applicable. Best practices are best practices. So it's important that we use the best practices that fit our area.
Commissioner Bender?
Erin, I'm just curious if you could flesh out a little bit for us what the pilot program is that you're, the conceptual notion for the pilot program, and what it is you think we would buy for the $2-point-something million you quoted.
Yes, so a lot of the programming for triage centers across the nation, they have some sort of detoxification unit to detox off alcohol or other substances as needed. They have stabilization, so if you aren't under any sort of substance, but you're in a mental health type crisis that doesn't require hospitalization, they can stabilize there. And then we also have a stay for, if neither apply, a little bit of a stay similar to our sobering center, but a little bit different, under 24 hours to kind of get you back on your feet if you're not ready or appropriate for the other two units, under 24-hour stay. So the costs really come down to, as any organization, FTE, and making sure you have the right staff to serve that, and some of those are medical level staff, looking at a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner there for a little bit, and some RNs and different things is where that cost comes from, and some of the basic service components.
Has this group sat down with both of the heads of the hospitals and had that, you've been talking with them?
Yeah, we have both Avera and Sanford on our committees, and we've been in discussions. Their leaders are well aware of the project.
They're pretty excited. Are they excited about it?
And they're excited about the opportunity to bring the service to our community.
They're here.
Well, Sanford's here. So, yeah.
Additional questions?
And just to nail it down, so the next step, the date-wise of when we would be expecting to move forward, when are you thinking that would be?
I'm hoping within the next few months. Summer is really hard to get folks together with vacations and everything, and then with school starting. But within the last quarter of this year, I would hope that we would be able to have the time for those folks to come together and nail down those kind of what the pilot would look like, what the feasibility is, and the actual cost.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I do want to point out all the work that Erin and Carrie have done, along with all the other members that many of them are here. When you get 40 people in a room who are passionate about a cause and passionate about making a difference, it's hard to get everybody moving in the same direction. And so for the leadership in this project to be able to do that and all of the collaboration and communication, I know that we've sat in, full day trainings and half day trainings and been involved with really checking the boxes and making sure that we're honoring what the grant was intended for, as well as looking for additional funding resources. One of the things that has really been brought forward often is that you cannot incarcerate out of these issues. And so to just say, let's lock them up and be tough on crime just isn't going to work, because you let them out and they come right back in. And so to just house someone, I recently watched a show about this, and it was really interesting seeing the adverse effects that it had on folks when you did put them out in the community, oftentimes doing worse crime than just being addicted to alcohol and or drugs. And the other thing that I think there's a misconception about is that this triage is not just for homeless and repeat offenders. This is for everyone. This is for if you have a family member that's having issues and need treatment as well. This is for everyone, and why it needs to be also accessible to all. And so it's going to take some changing of thinking. It's going to take some changing of how we do things with the police and sheriff's department and how we do criminal justice. It's going to possibly take some legislative action. And so we still have a ways to go, but having everyone moving in the same direction is a big deal. And I'm thankful for all the work that you've kept everybody kind of on task. So thank you for your presentation.
And I would say too, it's mental illness too. If you've got somebody in your household that's struggling with a mental illness issue and you need some place to go, this is a place you can take your family member. I think there's probably people in law enforcement that have gotten phone calls that have said, what do I do with my son? I'm struggling. And this will be a place for a quick answer or a quick place to go.
And we're trying not to duplicate, to access that nexus or pivot to access the services for mental health that we do have in our community. That's something that's worked very, very well in other communities.
Thank you, Erin. Next is an opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone that would like to speak about something that was not on our agenda today? And seeing no one move, we have a city informational meeting that follows this meeting. I do not think our presenters are here. So that meeting will start at 5 o'clock in this room. Normally it's at the city building. It's here at 5 o'clock. And with that, I'd ask for a motion on the county side to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.
Motion on the city side?
Approval?
There's been a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That passes. We're adjourned.
Meeting adjourned.